Kalen, you run the precision division at Magpul Dynamics. You're a former scout sniper and a former scout sniper schoolhouse instructor. This precision craft that we're dealing with, that we're talking about, you know, I look at it as kind of two sides to the coin. One, there's guys that just love long range precision because it's so hard and it's so challenging just to do some of the amazing shots that some of these guys are doing, or world record shots that guys are doing, and obviously stressing fundamentals and so on and so forth. But there's another side to it, which is people who maybe weren't able to get into the military but have always been fascinated with the whole scout sniper, U.S. Marine Corps, long range shooting, that whole not just image but kind of culture. You're going and not just taking your real world experience, but now you're bringing it back to the schoolhouse and developing guys, meaning there's this constant rotation of you were trained by individuals who had real world experience, and then now you're starting to develop yourself as an individual in your own craft, so to speak, because we know that what you're being taught in the school are merely guidelines, but problem solving and anomalies that are going to occur, that's where the real art, I believe, really comes into. And then not only that, but the fact that when you look at what you guys do, shooting is just such a small percentage. The way you're getting there, how you're getting there, and what you're doing while you're there, it's such an intricate part. So I guess what I would like to do is for the viewers, just really kind of break down what it's like to be a traditional Marine Corps sniper.
Holden half mil. Fire.
Well, that's a large question that a lot of people ask themselves. You know, what does it take to become a sniper, and what kind of person and mindset does it take to become a sniper? So I knew right off the bat that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a Marine Corps Scout sniper from the time I was a late teenager. I had read a couple of books, and I was just completely fascinated with not only, like you said, the precision shooting, but the actual craft of being a sniper. And of course, you know, there's the age-old adage, Marine Corps produces some of the finest snipers in the world. Some people may argue with that, other people may not argue with that, but it's more than just shooting. Just because you're an excellent shooter does not mean that you have the capability or the mindset to become a scout sniper. Our job is multifaceted, meaning that we have a multitude of different missions that we could encounter out as a scout sniper on the battlefield. Everything from area reconnaissance, zone reconnaissance, to select target missions, being in support of infantry units, being in support of air operations. 90% of what snipers do is really collecting information, collecting and reporting information. A lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about, you know, snipers collecting intelligence. We don't collect intelligence. What we collect is raw information. I have no idea what it is that somebody else at the battalion or regimental or division command post is looking for on that target site. All I know are critical elements of information that they require from me. I take the information in a raw form, transmit it via communications back to those command posts, and then there are people in the intelligence field that disseminate that information and turn it into intelligence, useful information. So we have a lot of different things going on, and one of the things that really is required of somebody that's going to try and go through the program is you have to be in the mindset of being adaptable. And of course, you know, the Marine Corps is always, you know, adapt and overcome. Well, snipers, because we have such a multifaceted mission statement, we have to be able to readily adapt to any situation that could be presented with us in our mission statement. So the individual should obviously have a strong mental mindset, just because the conditions that we operate in and some of the missions that we're faced with accomplishing, you need to have a very strong mental mindset. You really need to want to be a Marine Corps Scout Sniper. The program is extremely difficult to go through, and it's not necessarily difficult physically, it's difficult mentally, in a mental aspect, because there is just so many things that you need to learn and that you need to process and then regurgitate again to be proficient at your job. You know, we're the jacks of all trades but masters of none, because we could find ourselves doing any number of different missions out there.
There's a whole art to the precision. Wind calls, read and win, the environments, being able to be very consistent behind the gun so that everything you're doing isn't changing. From the shooting aspect of it, that's obviously really tough and demanding as well, and those criteria that guys face. What you're describing in the overall mission, sitting on a hillside watching a target, lasing a target, calling in aircraft, that's like a whole nother, job description right there. And that small percentage, when you finally do have to take that shot, and depending upon what the conditions are, that could be tough at that point. So, I mean, there's such diversity there, and I think a lot of people think it's just sneaking around and shooting. I know urban warfare is really taking over a lot, so you find yourselves around a lot more individuals, but I'm sure in Afghanistan you might be more separate or separated in regards to either a 2 or 3 person team moving from point A to point B. So I imagine individually you have to have the right mindset because there's nobody else with you to sit there and hold your hand.
Absolutely, Chris. The thing with, being a scout sniper is you have to understand that you are taking an enormous risk when you leave that friendly line. You could be operating as far as 10 miles from the nearest friendly position or the nearest quick reaction force. You could have an estimated wait time. Maybe you don't have air support for that mission. Maybe artillery is out of range or tasked with another mission for your particular set of operational parameters. So you have to understand that in a 4-man team, you have yourself and 3 other people to rely on. It takes a lot of integrity and maturity to understand the great weight that's on your shoulders as a scout sniper that's out there operationally, giving the information back to your supported unit commander or whatever unit that you're supporting. So the idea of basically just sneaking around in the woods and taking a precision long-range shot, although it's the classic mindset of what the epitome of a Marine Scout sniper is, that's not the way it is anymore. You mentioned Afghanistan. That arena, in my opinion, is almost like a sniper's paradise, given the terrain, the nature of the terrain, the ability to go on that extended patrol and utilize the terrain and the vegetation to conceal yourself and maintain that concealment while you conduct your operations. It gives you a lot more freedom as a sniper. You also mentioned the urban warfare. It presents a great challenge to that sniper, like in my case, where when I grew up as a sniper, urban warfare was not really looked upon with a great amount of respect, if you will. Granted, yeah, we trained for it. We went to the urban sniper school. We did training in rural and urban environments, exercises out in town, taking live shots out in town, doing direct action hits, hostage rescues, maritime interdiction operations, and things like that. Everything that I learned in my younger years as a sniper was set in the environment that you see out here on the range. It's that green side mission, it's that ghillie suit, it's the cami paint on your face, it's the vegetation that you're crawling through.
And like you said, that's that more traditional thought that we all have, when we read books, when we're a kid. That's exactly what I pictured back then as far as sniping goes. The guy with the paint on his face, with the ghillie suit on his back. When you think about the Marine Corps, I don't even know if there's another job that I ever think of in the Marine Corps, not to take away from guys that are doing a lot of great stuff for this country and women nowadays, but that's what I traditionally think of. You could definitely find yourself now in a situation where you may not even take a shot. You mentioned that hillside in Afghanistan, and you might just be calling in airstrikes and you don't even want to fire or give your position away because you're sitting in a position where guys are coming through constantly, you have eyes on, and your mission objective or mission complete could be the fact that, yeah, you killed a lot of people because of the information in which you were providing, maybe an air asset or a drone or something to that effect. So I imagine there's going to be a lot of times now where you leave the arena and haven't even taken a shot.
Absolutely. I've been in multiple situations where I called more fire missions, mortars and artillery, than I even fired my rifle. I didn't fire my rifle at all. I've called 28 mortar missions in one day alone because my range to the target was beyond the capabilities of my weapon system to provide that precision fire. So we resorted to using the communication assets because communication for a scout sniper or anybody in a reconnaissance role is absolute life. That's your lifeline to everything that you do. Once that communication asset goes away, you stop becoming an asset and you now become a large liability. So we resorted to calling for fire on areas of interest or areas where we would receive rocket or mortar fire from. We had the ability to have those good, clear, crisp optics to engage those targets and the good communication skills that snipers and reconnaissance assets are known for because that is our lifeline.
Let me ask you another question. Obviously, you know, in that scenario, we kind of painted Afghanistan. Go back to the urban environment. Paint me a scenario a little bit, maybe something that you've even been involved in, where you weren't busy calling in airstrikes. You're on the ground now with engagements, and of course, everybody knows where you're at. You know, that's the thing that I always think really is difficult when you're in a foreign environment. It's not like you're an American, you know, trying to blend in. You know, you've got maybe a discrete case. You got to get up to a building and watch a target or something. You know, where you're able to fit in a little bit more. You're talking about a foreign country where, you know, you don't fit in at all. It's very difficult to blend in. And if you're rolling in, you know, with a military unit at that point, they all know where you're at, and your window of disguise, so to speak, or concealability is severely diminished, and you're going to be with the rest of the troops taking fire at that point and not able to be more stealth or running more low profile.
That brings up a great topic. There's environments that are semi-permissive to your presence, and then there's environments that are completely non-permissive, meaning that if you do step into that non-permissive environment, you're going to get shot at. It's just the fact of life. No matter what it is that you're doing, no matter what size of the force it is that you have with you, you're going to be engaged by the enemy. And in a direct combat role where snipers are in direct support of advancing infantry units, it plays a critical role because all of those missions, they come together. Not only do we need to communicate with that supported unit, we need to also provide those precision suppressive fires so that infantry unit can continue its push towards the objective. There's a multiple of ways that we can do that, but most of the time it's through a leapfrog. The snipers will push ahead of that advancing infantry unit, fight their way from point A to point B, establish a foothold, and dominate that linear terrain feature or that avenue of approach that infantry unit is going to move along. We dominate that through precision fires and supporting arms, whether that be the mortar units that are moving with that infantry company that are organic to that unit, or a heavy mortar platoon or an artillery unit that is at the rear of the lines. So we're utilizing not only our communication assets to talk to those entities, but we're also having to deconflict with other advancing units while you're experiencing all that fog of war, the gunfights, the mortars landing, the rockets landing, the massive amounts of confusion that you hear over the radio. You have to be able to sift through all of that stuff, and as a team leader, do your job, because there's other people that are depending on you to make those clear, concise decisions under that enormous amount of stress.
You know, we just talked about Afghanistan on obviously one particular mission where you may not be taking a shot, but you're still providing a very vital role. Urban warfare, say in Iraq, could be slightly different.
Yeah, that's where I got all my operational experience, was over in Iraq in the Anbar province. In 2004, it was an extremely volatile area. We were seeing quite a few firefights all the time, you know, and there are some certain areas where we would go that you pretty much guaranteed that if you got within 1,000 meters of that area, you were going to come under fire, whether it be small arms fire or indirect fire. So being in Iraq, it was a difficult situation for a sniper because it's a very condensed area and it is partially urban. But at the majority of the times, we were wearing our green camis because it was so rural. We were along the Euphrates River basin, so everything was very lush, very green, a lot of palm groves, a lot of rice paddies. So one of the things that we came and identified as sort of a limitation was the ability to remain concealed throughout the daylight hours, because the local populace activity was so intense. There's farmers constantly walking through their fields, checking their rice paddies, checking their irrigation canals, and they're farmers, so they are very aware of their entire surroundings. So if they see a footprint or something on one of their rice paddy dikes, they automatically identify, hey, something's not right on my property and there's somebody here that's not supposed to be here. We had to adapt to that situation, and a lot of it was done doing night missions. We would just go out for the night, observe and report on areas of possible IED emplacement activity. But a lot of people ask me, what was your tour like over there? And I say, well, to put it in a nutshell, it was a 6-7 month long hunting trip, because that's all we were doing, is we were hunting. We were looking at maps, we were looking at aerial photographs, identifying choke points, trying to think like the enemy and say, okay, well, if I was the enemy and I was to place an improvised explosive device somewhere, where would I place it to do the most damage? Okay, we look at the map and we say, okay, here's a choke point here, here's a choke point here. They've set IEDs here in the past, so we're going to sit on this for a couple of nights and see if we can identify some possible activity. And our rules of engagement were fairly liberal at that time. Anything that, any kind of digging device that we saw, we had the clearance to eliminate that target based upon the TTPs that we had seen from the enemy in the past.
Well, I imagine, you've got a couple different aspects too. I mean, that you're still able to sneak around, and when, of course, you think of a traditional sniper, that's exactly what most people envision. But there's times where you would be attached to a unit doing a push, and I imagine you could find yourself in a situation where you don't get the option of being low profile because you're in the middle of a city, you're part of that unit, you're there as a capability, but now you're, in a sense, you're in the same firefight as everybody else is in, and you don't necessarily have the distances involved, where you might be taking a 1,200 or 1,000 yard shot that puts you pretty far away with the ability to call in air, because it doesn't matter at 1,000 yards whether they get impacted by mortar, rockets, or a drone, whatever the case is. Whereas now everything has to, in a sense, be done by hand. So I imagine that's going to be another aspect
Absolutely.
that you face.
I participated in an assault on the city of Fallujah in the Anbar province in 2004, and that was one of the largest full-scale urban assaults that the Marine Corps had executed since Hue City in Vietnam in 1968. So it was extremely massive in scope. We had over 8 battalions that participated in this assault. So it was a full-on direct combat urban warfare situation where the sniper teams were directly attached to the advancing infantry units. And in that instance, we were tasked with providing that precision fire overwatch, as well as calling for fire, mortars, artillery, and possibly airstrikes on targets of opportunity.
What kind of loadout are you carrying at that point?
The loadout is absolutely intense because in that situation, we understood that we had an extremely well-entrenched and well-trained enemy that we were going to be fighting, and we had no idea as to what we were going to encounter, how the flow was going to go in terms of concept of operations. Everybody knows that's ever been in a firefight, Murphy's Law always takes into effect within the first 30 seconds. The plan never survives. You always end up having to adapt, improvise, and overcome. So we were loaded extremely heavily. I was extremely well loaded out because we didn't know what we were going to come up against. We wanted to be prepared for anything. We had no idea when we would possibly be resupplied with ammunition, water, or food is on the absolute bottom end of the totem pole at that point in time. So I had carried a 9mm Beretta M9. I had 5 magazines for that pistol. I carried an M4 carbine, and I had 15 magazines for that weapon system on my body. I carried the M40A3 sniper rifle with 150 rounds of the M118 long-range ball ammunition. And on top of that, I carried a couple of smoke grenades, 4 fragmentation grenades, batteries for your night vision, batteries for your radio, 4 quarts of water. It adds up.
When you get to hump that stuff at the end of the day, there's a lot of weight there, and what you grow up on and envision and see, or you read in books and everything else like that, it's completely different. So to hear you carrying that much of a loadout, and I mean that's not even probably what commo equipment.
I had a very small M-Biter radio just so that I could communicate with the supported unit as well as battalion elements in the event that I needed to call mortar support on targets. So very small radio, but
Spare batteries?
Spare batteries for the radio, spare batteries for the night vision, spare batteries for
So you're carrying the night
everything.
vision. How big's your night vision? You're carrying a 22?
No, I chose actually to carry to mount the Simrad on my M40A3. It's a dedicated night vision optic for the sniper rifle, extremely heavy. So I had to carry that in a backpack along with extra batteries for it. So
Are we talking like
we're talking
little
double
watch
A's.
batteries?
Yeah,
or-
little AA batteries.
But it all adds up.
But
It
you
all
have a
adds
pouch.
up.
You have a pouch on your vest that's specifically dedicated for batteries because you got AA's, AAA's, watch batteries.
Well, what do you think with all that now food? How much food did you bring on that trip?
We didn't bring any food. We left the food with the advancing supply line.
Okay.
Because that was at the bottom of the
So what do you
totem
think your loadout was? Just with kit, guns, ammo, everything.
pole. My vest probably weighed about 85 pounds. You know, my plates, my soft armor, my magazines, grenades, water, all that stuff. And obviously that's not including the weapon systems that I carried. You
or
know,
your pack.
The M40A3 was 20 pounds. The M4 carbine's about 7 pounds, you know, with an optic on there. And obviously the pistol is not much, but in that situation, ounces make pounds and pounds make pain. And I can say that throughout my military career, I've done a lot of physically intense activities, but that one single day was probably the most intense physical activity I'd ever done in my entire life. By the time the ramps dropped at about 6:30 in the morning, we crossed the line of departure. The first time I looked at my watch, it was 13:30 because I felt it getting a little warm outside. I was laying on a rooftop. It felt like 5 minutes. It literally felt like we had just gotten out of the Amtrak 5 minutes ago, but it was already 13:30.
Wow.
Because you're constantly active, and it's not like you're walking anywhere. You're sprinting from objective to objective. And when you have all that weight on your body, your momentum can sometimes carry you a little bit faster than your legs will propel you. And a lot of times you'll end up falling because you have so much weight on you. You know, you try to sprint as fast as you can across the street because the street's a bullet funnel.
So you're at full speed in a sprint, which looks like a fast walk to everybody else.
Exactly. Your legs are only moving, 6 or 7 inches at a time, and your brain is telling yourself, I am moving as fast as I can move, but it's just not happening that fast.
Did you leave with that loadout, or did you expend it?
I expended probably 10 magazines out of my primary weapon system within, the first few hours of the fight. Maybe a magazine of pistol ammunition, and probably 50, 60 rounds out of the bolt gun.
Obviously, I'm prying here, so stop me if it goes too far. Did you ever get into a situation where your guys were taking fire from another enemy sniper?
Absolutely. It's hard to say whether you're taking fire from a true quote-unquote sniper. The enemy individuals that we encountered, some of them were doing things the proper way that you would expect somewhat of a trained sniper to do, meaning staying back in the room in the shadows, utilizing the geometry of the room with the window and the lighting conditions available. But I never ran into any situation where I was under a precision, well-trained enemy sniper fire. Basically, it was ineffective sniper fire from individuals that weren't well-trained. But most of the time, we would identify enemy individuals that would pin down advancing infantry forces. We'd get a radio call, hey, we need you to come up here and take care of this problem for us so that we can continue our advance. And usually I would do that by calling for fire on it, using our organic mortar support or precision rifle shot.
Well, now, going back to and constantly switching gears here, because like you said, the environment that you change for is very fluid. I guess my question is, where traditionally and what guys were doing traditionally years ago, and maybe even what you were being trained for, how has that really developed nowadays with the assets that you have, where guys back in Vietnam didn't have these assets, or different conflicts didn't necessarily have these assets? But how is the long range community, without giving it anything that people don't already know about on CNN or Fox News, how has that grown, I guess, and what's your capability now, and how has it developed since you left that schoolhouse? Because I'm gonna bring you back to the schoolhouse. You were there going through it as a student, graduated that, and now you're out in the real world. How has that grown?
The warfighter has so much technology at their fingertips nowadays that we didn't have when I was growing up as a young sniper in the Marine Corps. I had an M40A1 with a 10 power fixed universal scope on it. I didn't have a bipod. I didn't have a PDA. I had probably a 15-year-old dope chart that said this is probably what your scope is going to do at 800 yards, but it may or it may not do that. So the advances in communications are really key. When I first started doing reconnaissance operations, a 4-man team would carry 1 radio per man. Basically, we would carry radios that allowed us to communicate with our other teams that were in the area of operations, radios that would allow us to communicate miles and miles and miles back to our surveillance and reconnaissance center to collect the information that we were reporting, radios that we could communicate with satellites, and other radio that we would use to communicate with air assets or the direct action force that was eventually going to come in and do a training operation on the target site we were reporting on. So every man was carrying a radio because at that time, that was the technology that we were limited to. Now, you have 1 radio or 2 radios that can do all of that, so that lightens up the team's load. It makes them even more of a force multiplier than a sniper normally would be. Even in the older days of carrying those 4 radios, we were effective force multipliers, but now with the technology, we're just that much more effective on the battlefield. Snipers have a common problem of being overtasked, meaning your supported unit commander says, well, wait a minute, you can do this for me? Oh, and you can do this, this, and this? Well, I want you to do all of this. And you, as a team leader, need to be able to kind of pull in the reins a little bit and say, well, yes, I can do all these things, but there is a point at which I'm completely overtasked, and then the areas of larger responsibility start to get overtaken by those other taskings that are not as important as the other larger areas of responsibility. So there's a time at which, you as a sniper team leader have to have that maturity, and you have to have the ability to communicate effectively with your supported unit commander, because you're the one that is briefing everything that your team is going to do. You're the one that's actually selling your mission to that supported unit commander, giving him the confidence that your team can actually carry out the missions that are assigned to you.
You talked about scopes. How have the guns changed, the scopes changed, the electronics in regards to the PDAs and the ballistic solvers and computer systems that are now available to you guys for having to take that shot? The fact that you have air assets cut off to you to utilize those in a situation where you might be doing a combination of shooting and, it gets out of hand because you're a small unit. So at that point, once a gunfight starts, everybody knows you're there. So in a sense, you're compromised. So to have those air assets available to you, or gunships, whatever it is in that arena, to where now this capability is just really gone from, I've got better data on target now, I've got better data to put into my guns, I've got better scopes, better equipments, better guns. Just how has that grown?
It's grown exponentially, actually. The guns, we've always had good guns. The Marine Corps has always had very accurate rifles. The rifles have progressed with the ergonomics of a new stock, making that rifle more customizable to that shooter, because everybody's body mechanics are different. So that actually helps out considerably in that shooter's level of precision and accuracy in setting up that rifle for them. The scopes, the optics have come probably the farthest. We're utilizing new, really high quality glass scopes from Schmidt & Bender and Premier Reticles. They are really enhancing that rifle's capability to deliver that precision. Whereas my old Unertl scope, I could only focus parallax at your 1 yard line. At 300 yards, we would focus parallax for. And I look back now and I see, the scope that I have on my rifle now, I check parallax every single time I get down behind the gun. Every single time I transition to a longer range target or a closer range target, I'm checking parallax. And I look back on it now and I say, how did I ever qualify? How did my boss ever qualify with all that gear? It's just focusing on those core fundamental skills that enable you to power through that lacking in equipment. So the optics have come probably the farthest. Our personal gear, our web gear, the gear that we carry all those magazines and the fragmentation grenades, our body armor has come a long way. I've seen Marines receive multiple impacts in their plates and still continue to fight. They're able to go get another plate, replace that broken plate, and continue in that fight. So the gear is getting lighter, it's getting more manageable, it's getting more ergonomically correct. The warfighter is actually able to get to that same 85 pounds that was on my vest, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, is going to feel completely different on a much more advanced, technologically advanced vest and lighter weight plates that we have today. It just allows that much more speed, that much more efficiency on the battlefield.
Obviously, we're now exposed to a lot of changing environments, a lot of different missions within that one arena that you found yourself in. Now you come back and take that experience back to the schoolhouse. How does that change? You know what I mean? How does that change from your perspective? I know from my experiences, what I saw and what I was being taught never 100% translated over to the real world experiences that you found yourself in. I just was never really exposed for how it went down. So now my goal is to try to expose people to a little bit more of this is exactly how it's going to go down. It doesn't always work that way. So how did that work for you?
Well, before I became an instructor, I went on a standard Western Pacific deployment. We did our normal training workups as scout sniper teams would usually do, attached to infantry companies, doing everything that we would get trained to do back here stateside. So I decided that I want to grow and teach. I enjoy teaching, so I decided to apply to become an instructor. At that time, it was the 1st Marine Division Scout Sniper School. So I started teaching in 2001, and I really enjoyed myself. I enjoy teaching. I enjoy trying to pass that knowledge on, because every single student that comes in front of you, they all learn differently. So to be able to take this craft and this art of that completely encompasses sniping and to try and mold these applicants into what your vision is, the time that you were a team leader or a chief sniper in a platoon. I took a lot of pride in that, and I enjoyed it very much. There's a way that you get trained, and then there's a way that it really happens. And I think every instructor tries to take what they've learned in reality and instill it into the curriculum that they're teaching, because that's your responsibility to make that curriculum grow and expand over time. So a lot of the things that I learned on training missions, like the gear, how much weight is it that you're really going to carry? Well, I can tell you right now, I routinely carried a 100-pound ruck on training missions. So the guys at the schoolhouse, I feel as though in my mind that these guys need to be exposed to what it's like to carry a 100-pound ruck for 4 or 5 days with that much weight to over an extended patrol over varying terrain. Being a team leader and having the constant mental stress of what-ifing certain scenarios throughout that entire time that you're on that patrol. What if this happens? What am I going to do? What if I receive contact from the front, left, right, rear? What am I going to do at this particular instance? How am I going to get across this danger area? And these are all things that should be going through your mind as a team leader. And as an instructor, you should be striving to pass that knowledge on and make these applicants understand, hey, this is what it's really like. This is what you're really going to have to be faced with as an operational sniper. The things like the maturity, the things like the adaptability to certain situations, and the integrity. Integrity is huge. You are a 4-man asset that somebody is trusting to give vital information that they are going to actually shape and formulate a plan for a large joint operation. It's coming from, that information is coming from you. You are the one that's supplying that information. So there's an enormous amount of trust in saying, hey, do I trust these 4 guys to leave friendly lines and patrol 10 kilometers to the objective area, sit there for 4 days, and give me the information that I need to make this operation happen? There's a lot of trust involved in that. And that's one of the things that we try to instill in the schoolhouse, is not only those 3 things, but then the marksmanship. That, in my opinion, the marksmanship asset, because it is a very small but very, very important role, that needs to be second nature. That needs to be an unconscious competence in that operator's mind.
After going on a deployment like yours, now you're coming back to the schoolhouse, you're teaching there. How does that change you? What's one of the things that you just brought back? I know you can't change things overnight, but over a period of time, you're like, we've got to change this into curriculum because it didn't go down a certain way.
One of the things that I identified right off the bat was the precision shooting aspect of it. We got minimal training in the maximum point blank theory and the danger space concepts and manipulating your mil dots to make them work for you in a rapid multiple target engagement scenario. When you have 3 or 4 people running down the street at the same time, you need to understand how your optics work and how to make them work for you to increase your survivability on a battlefield. So obviously the shooting aspect of it, you can never shoot enough and you can never induce enough stress on an individual that is going to go potentially into a combat situation. You can never induce enough stress, and you can never induce enough scenarios to get them prepared. The other aspect of it is, while I'm shooting and I'm reducing targets, oh, by the way, I got a call for fire. I've got an enemy mortar position over here that I need to take care of. Also, I've got another infantry squad that's trying to advance on my left flank that I have to deconflict with them to make sure that they're not going to receive any blue-on-blue fire. So many things happening on the battlefield. It's such a fluid environment that the scenario-based training is absolutely key, because of all that immense amount of responsibility that the sniper team leader or sniper himself has on his shoulders. That constant bombardment of different scenarios, the what-if situations, throwing different things at that individual and to see how they process that information and how they problem solve to get themselves out of that situation.
I appreciate you kind of going through some of the different aspects and, lessons learned, things like that, and different aspects in regards to it's not just about shooting. There's a lot more to it, both mentally, physically, and that mindset is obviously key, the way you process that information and your ability to solve problems. My last question would be, for anybody thinking about doing this, I'm that kid in high school, graduating, 17 years old, thinking about joining the Marine Corps. This is what I think I want to do. What do I really need to be prepared for?
You need to be prepared for a huge huge mental burden, meaning you need to have a mindset of not only don't quit, you have to understand what it is that you're truly going to get yourself potentially into. So the other point of consideration, and not only from a training standpoint, but from a mindset standpoint is, everybody that goes into a combat situation, you don't ever think it's going to happen to you, but sometimes it does. I found myself in the situation of being wounded, and it definitely changed my whole opinion and outlook on training. 1 second you're doing your thing as an operator, and then the next second you find yourself laying in the street having a corpsman work on you, and you're getting evacuated, and you're watching the rest of your team walk around that corner. Now your assistant team leader is having to take on the burdens of being a team leader, and now everybody's role in the team changes. And that's definitely something that anybody in a combat situation has to train for, because you never know, it could happen to you. I had a platoon of 26 individuals. Over 20 of those were awarded Purple Hearts during our deployment. So it's a reality, and it's something that everybody in a combat situation has to face and has to train for. Do you have the mindset to be 10 clicks away from the nearest friendly position on your own with 3 other people, relying on not only yourself and your ability to make decisions, but them as well? Do you have the ability to have that integrity to keep yourself awake, to keep yourself diligent so that your other teammates can rely on you? Do you have the physical ability to carry that 100-pound rucksack from point A to point B, no matter how far it is, no matter what kind of terrain that you encounter, and still be able to stay on that target site and be diligent for however many days that you're supposed to be there for? Do you have the ability, the mental mindset, the mental toughness to sit out in the rain for 3 days, getting soaking wet, or in the snow for a couple of days? It's more of a mental game than anything. And once your mind breaks, then your body breaks. Your mind will take your body a lot farther than you ever imagined that it could go. And that's really the name of the game, is how bad do you want it, and how far will your mind carry you?
In your opinion, what's the difference between a military sniper and a law enforcement sniper or marksman or designated marksman, or now for political reasons we have to say, hey, it's an open air option, but at the end of the day we know what that option's for. That option's for taking a shot on somebody because they probably are dealing with a hostage situation. I mean, they're not there to serve Hallmark cards. So what do you see as a difference or not a difference?
Well, one of the first things I want to say is that there's a lot of people out there that consider law enforcement snipers and military snipers separate, meaning that they don't have very much in common. And quite frankly, in my opinion, that's just not true, because the difference is mainly just mission statement between a law enforcement sniper and a military sniper. However politically correct you want to be with it, they're still there to do that exact same job. The fundamentals of marksmanship are the same. Whether you are a law enforcement sniper or whether you're a military sniper, you still have to manipulate this weapon system exactly the same. The only thing that's going to change is a mission statement. And actually now we're starting to see that mission statement evolve. Law enforcement snipers are actually being employed very, very similar to military snipers in the forms of reconnaissance and surveillance. One of the main differences for a law enforcement sniper is in the military, snipers have marksmanship as 10% of their responsibility. When a law enforcement sniper receives that call out and arrives on the crisis site, that 10% responsibility is now 90% of his responsibility on that crisis site. He shows up to that crisis site and he's being called there for a specific reason, to take a surgical shot to reduce a threat.
Specifically, how does the training slightly differ based on that mission that law enforcement officers end up facing?
Well, they can differ in a couple of different ways. Mainly in the marksmanship arena, it's having the potential to shoot through mediums, such as a screen or shoot through glass, whether that suspect is either in a room behind multiple panes of glass, or whether he's in a vehicle behind a windshield or behind some safety glass on a side window, passenger or driver side window. So there's that aspect of it, and then there's also the aspect of it, you know, this law enforcement sniper could find himself in a very unconventional, offhand or unsupported position that he has no idea what he's going to encounter coming up on that scene. He could pull up on scene in his patrol car and jump out of his car and have to take a shot across his hood because the situation deteriorated that quickly. Or he could be sitting in a hedgerow for, you know, 1 or 2 days as negotiations take place with that suspect or that barricaded suspect in that building. From a mental aspect, that's why it's very similar in the whole grand scheme of things to a military sniper. In a combat situation, you know, we don't know what we're going to come up against, but we got a pretty rough idea given our map study, given our aerial reconnaissance photographs.
Your intelligence.
Right, all of the intelligence that we've had or lack thereof for that particular operation. But the law enforcement sniper, he really doesn't have that unless he's intimately familiar with that address or that certain block that was his beat beforehand. But you know, on a SWAT team, it could be miles and miles and miles away from your home area. Like here in this area, it's a regional SWAT team. So they operate throughout the entire county. So they have no idea where they could go and where they could be employed.
So what you're looking at there is the margin of error, target's foreground, background. All that has to be taken quickly into consideration. And then of course the shot that they're taking. We're happy if we can. I mean, if you get a guy at 1,000 yards and you get a shot on his body, that's an awesome shot. You know
Absolutely.
what I mean? Worst case there is he may still be fighting a little bit, but chances are he's gonna bleed out before he gets to you. Whereas law enforcement, they have to take a much more critical, precise shot. Typically, like you're saying, hey, we're dealing with a hostage situation and body shotting this guy may not be acceptable.
Exactly. We like to call that surgical shooting because you're trying to place that bullet on the target with surgical precision. Depending on what kind of situation it is, if it's a hostage situation, you're trying to stop that suspect from doing what he's doing immediately and immediately incapacitate that individual. So if he's got 1.5 pounds taken out of a 2-pound trigger, when that bullet enters his skull, he can't squeeze the last half pound out of that trigger, and you can save a life. But the surgical precision is normally inside 100 yards. Most law enforcement sniper shootings are between 40 and 75 yards. And the margin for error is absolutely minimal. I mean, you're trying to put a bullet in somebody's face, and not only necessarily in somebody's face, but in between their eyes or at the tip of their nose to cause that immediate incapacitation. And oftentimes the situation is extremely fluid and extremely dynamic.
Might even be moving.
That target might even be moving. You know, if you've ever tried to hold a steady point of aim on a human's head, that's the portion of a human that moves the most. And it's basically unconscious movement. That head is always constantly moving. So to be able to hold those crosshairs, especially while you're under an extreme amount of stress, if you haven't ever been under that kind of stress, you don't really fully appreciate what it does to your body physiologically and mentally. Everything changes at that point in time. So to be able to train to that surgical standard with the marksmanship and underneath stress is really where that difference gets separated. Like you said, you know, military snipers, I'm happy with a body shot at 300 yards. As long as that individual is now combat ineffective, then I'm happy with that. But a law enforcement sniper, not so much the case. That suspect needs to be stopped immediately.
So dealing with precision weapon systems, I think most people's minds go straight to that bolt gun. But as technology and weapons have gotten better and better, the semi-autos are finding themselves in a military role more and more often. What are your thoughts on some of these semi-automatic weapon systems?
Well, I think that semi-automatic weapon systems in the precision community definitely have their place. Snipers and semi-automatic weapons go back a long way, okay? They go back all the way to World War II, dealing with the M1 Garand, with the C version. The C version of the M1 Garand had an optic on it. It was offset to the left. so it could still facilitate loading of the weapon system from the top with the 8-round clip magazine.
But still use the end block clips.
Yes, exactly. So that presented some challenges, but not everybody could have that accurate match grade 1903 Springfield with the Lyman Super Spot target scope on there. It was definitely a fix for a problem. As time progressed and programs progressed, generally speaking, in peacetime, funding for snipers and research and development for precision weapons kind of sinks low a little bit. It's not a priority. But generally, when wartime ends up happening, commanders see the benefit of the snipers and how well that they can be a force multiplier on the battlefield. Funding starts getting driven towards their research and development of new weapons, new communication systems, and anything to enhance their capabilities. So, I mean, what we have here today is just a broad spectrum of the current semi-automatic weapon systems that are available to our military snipers. They all serve a purpose. One of the benefits to having all these different types of weapon systems out there, to include the bolt-action rifle, the sniper has the capability to kind of have a suite of weapon systems to choose from to fit the mission that he's been tasked with accomplishing. They all serve their own purpose. Like right here, we have the Barrett M82 Special Applications Scoped Rifle. It is a special applications rifle in the sense that it is not capable of the utmost precision like a traditional bolt-action rifle, but it has the purpose of reducing hard enemy targets such as bunkers and mortar positions or artillery positions and things like that. Anti-vehicle, the rounds that can be fired out of this weapon system can penetrate light armor. They can punch through a vehicle's engine block and obviously immobilize that vehicle. It's also capable of reducing human targets as well. Not exactly what it was designed for, but it's also capable of that. The bullet that was developed for this weapon system is the Rothfuss round. It's an armor-piercing incendiary round that is capable of punching through about 2 inches of homogeneous steel. So it's got a lot of capabilities to effectively reduce those hard targets on the battlefield. This weapon system actually breaks into 2 pieces. You've got a rear lock pin, a mid-lock pin, and the upper receiver will split from the lower receiver. The barrel is actually mounted on springs to help absorb the massive amount of recoil generated from that 50 caliber casing. It has a muzzle brake that also assists in managing that recoil by deflecting that blast to the rear. It has a very large buffer spring to absorb the massive amount of shock from that large mass bolt coming back to the rear and then straight back forward again. A lot of people think that this weapon system is very difficult to shoot in terms of recoil management. It's actually about the equivalent of shooting a 12-gauge shotgun, okay? There's a lot of concussion involved. The muzzle brake causes a very large signature, okay? So in a position, in a rural environment or in a green side environment, generally speaking, as soon as you fire this weapon system, your position, you can pretty much consider it compromised due to the massive amount of signature. Different tactics have to be developed in order to mitigate that problem and increase that team survival on a battlefield. The weapon is very heavy. This weapon weighs about 36 pounds with a full 10-round magazine and ammunition. Me personally, when we used to employ this weapon operationally, if we were doing any sort of foot movement, we'd break the weapon down into 2 pieces. One individual in the team would carry the upper receiver. The other individual in the team carried a lower receiver and one of the magazines or the ammunition.
What are some of the application considerations you might need to make utilizing this with your observer?
That's a great question. Because this weapon system produces such a large signature, traditionally observers will be either on the left hand or the right hand side of the shooter to observe the impact of that round. But one of the things that we found operationally to help that shooter mitigate the recoil and to stay on target for rapid follow-up shots, you'll actually find the observer laying on top of the shooter and using a pair of binoculars, vice a spotting scope, to help to observe those impacts. One of the main considerations for an observer when you're employing this weapon system is obviously we see this large angled muzzle brake. Okay, at about a 30-degree angle on each side, you're going to get a face full of muzzle blast from that muzzle brake. So definitely a consideration to either stay directly behind the rifle or far enough to one side or the other so you don't actually get a face full of muzzle blast from the weapon.
This weapon's been criticized sometimes for accuracy, and I know a lot of accuracy measuring sticks with a 100-yard line but in your experience, like where have you really seen some of maybe these myths dispelled, and can this still be held to the same measuring stick as similar semi-automatic weapon systems?
Well, that's a good question, because a lot of people are under the misconception that this is a sniper rifle, okay? And it depends on what your consideration is in terms of accuracy level of a sniper rifle. Most people think within a minute of angle, okay? Obviously, this weapon is not capable of a minute of angle, just simply because of how much movement is in the barrel is on springs. It's not exactly capable of that much accuracy, but that's not exactly what this weapon was designed to do. And that's where I think a lot of misconceptions arise, is that they're trying to make this weapon into something that it's not. Okay, this weapon is designed to reduce vehicles, immobilize vehicles, reduce hard emplacements, anti-material type targets. I've shot this weapon operationally out to about 2,000 meters, okay, and it's accurate to within the acceptable level of that standard, okay? We're looking, between 2 minutes of angle and 3 minutes of angle, okay? And you're not gonna see this weapon is not gonna shine at 100 yards, okay? You can't take this weapon at 100 yards and shoot the same kind of groups that you could shoot out of, say, the M110 or the SPR over there. It's just that bullet is, without getting too much into external ballistics, it's just not, the bullet isn't asleep yet, and it's not stable yet, and generally speaking, we zero these at about 300 yards.
The next semi-automatic we have here is a Mark 12 Motto. What are your thoughts on this weapon system?
I think that weapon system was developed with a purpose, and that purpose being to give whatever unit or team the capability of having a precision weapon, and also the added benefit of two things: blending in and not standing out as a sniper, because obviously, especially me as a sniper, when I'm observing and reporting on the enemy, a sniper is pretty high on my target priority list, okay?
Sure.
So I want to make sure that if I see that type of target, I'm identifying that, and I'm going to key in on that, and I'm probably going to do my best to reduce that target over any other target that I have available. So the SPR, it's exactly that. It's a special purpose rifle. It gives the operator the advantage of having that precise capability, but with the reduced signature and being able to blend in with the other units and not standing out by carrying a weapon. You know, if you have some sort of an optic on there, a lot of weapons nowadays do have optics on them. Even in the regular infantry units, people are running a lot of different optics on there. Also, ammunition
commonality.
The ammunition commonality.
That's great. I mean,
absolutely.
I'm out of ammo now. I can share with the rest of the unit.
And you can stay in the fight. Granted, you're not, this weapon system was designed primarily to take a specific type of ammunition to extract the precision potential out of it, but can I still stay alive in a gunfight and put people down with standard ball ammunition? Absolutely. So that's one of the benefits of having a weapon like that.
Sure, and that 77 grain ammunition from the Mark T62 round is what really lets this weapon system achieve that accuracy potential. So we're able to take this weapon system derived from the M16, going out to 550 meters to 600, 700, 800, and as we've seen, we can take this weapon system out in excess of 1,000 yards.
Absolutely. We were just shooting it yesterday at 1,150 yards and hitting 18-inch wide plate targets, okay, consistently.
And even though we're not pushing, much more than 950 feet per second at that range, I still don't want to get pecked with one.
Absolutely. It's going to make, it's going to either harass the enemy or it's going to poke holes in them, okay, and cause some sort of damage. Is it going to cause that immediate incapacitating killing shot? Not necessarily, okay, but this projectile, the 77 grain projectile, is actually extremely lethal at closer ranges. 500 yards and in, the way it's designed, the terminal ballistic performance of it is actually outstanding on human targets. The next weapon that we got here is the M110 semi-automatic sniper system. This is kind of an evolution from the Stoner SR-25. I carried a Stoner SR-25 over in Iraq, had a lot of great uses out of that. We were able to see the true merits of having a suppressed semi-automatic weapon system on several occasions, one of which being, we were able to positively identify an individual that was observing and reporting on friendly troop movements from a marketplace. We were able to get a sniper team in position about 320 meters away from that marketplace, very crowded area. The sniper's position was in an open pool table desert. They were shooting out of basically a sand hide. Once the individual in that team got the clearance to take the shot, he employed the SR-25 with a suppressor and reduced the target with 2 shots. And nobody in the marketplace knew anything had happened at all. The team was able to exfil uncompromised back to friendly lines, and 4 hours later, when the infantry went to recover the body, people were pretty much completely astounded that there was somebody that was dead on the roof. So that, in my eyes, really opened my thoughts and how effective a suppressed semi-automatic weapon system can be on the battlefield. In an urban environment, a sniper that properly utilizes the variable geometry of buildings, rooms, the depth inside of a room that he's possibly shooting out of, you couple that with a suppressed weapon system, that sniper is almost going to be impossible to locate by the enemy. And that enables that sniper to stay in that position for a much longer amount of time than he would be if he was unsuppressed.
So I guess with experiences like that and other similar experiences and successes, it's kind of changed everyone's mind about a semi-automatic weapon in a precision capacity.
Absolutely. You know, years ago, when the original semi-automatic weapon system came out as a quote-unquote sniper rifle, people looked at it with a lot of skepticism. They said, you know, is it capable of the level of accuracy and repeatability that we would come to expect from a precision rifle? And through the advancements of CNC technology, CNC machining technology, the fit-up of parts, the consistency and fit-up of parts has really made these weapon systems blossom with the precision rifle community. More and more you see even civilians starting to adopt these weapon platforms in competitions, precision rifle competitions, national matches. People have been shooting the service rifle competitions for years, extracting a lot of accuracy potential out of these semi-automatic weapon systems. I think that they have solidified their place in the precision weapon community, for sure. Essentially, a data book is a journal of your shooting with one weapon system or multiple weapon systems that logs all the data that you see as pertinent as a shooter. Traditionally, a data book was used to track elevation and windage data for a multitude of density, altitude, or atmospheric conditions for a particular weapon system. Now, with the advent of ballistic computers and ballistic solvers that are available to the shooter's fingertips, the data book is not necessarily as useful as it once was. There's still multiple applications that you can use a traditional data book for in precision shooting. Anything from hand load development, civilian match shooting, or law enforcement applications, the data book is still a very effective tool. Back in the day, before ballistic computers were readily available, this data book was basically more important than the rifle itself, meaning all the data from my rifle, how it shot in different density altitude conditions, it was all stored right here in this data book. Even though ballistic computers are incredibly useful and they are changing the state of our art in precision shooting, the data book is still incredibly useful and it holds a wealth of information for the precision shooter. This data book is what we call a modular data book, meaning that all of the pages taken out and replaced at the shooter's will, meaning if I want a different set of marginal information in here, I can get a different set of marginal information. It's basically a 3-ring binder. So if I have a different weapon system that I want to still use the same binder for, I can take this information out of it, paperclip it together, and archive it for that particular weapon system. So this particular book, it's set up so that we have marginal information in the front part of the book. It's got some rough ballistic charts in here for various standardized weapon systems out there. This data book has a range estimation checklist, which is very helpful for quick reference. This next page is extremely useful. It's a basic size sheet for basic sizes of objects in the continental United States. This is very helpful for a law enforcement officer, say his rangefinder went down and he needs to get an accurate range to a specific target. He's got all different kinds of sizes of items that he can reference, and these are all measured in inches. Yard to meter conversion, very helpful, very useful information. If you're working with two different weapon systems, say one of your partners wants to stick with meters and you prefer to use yards, very quickly you can do a conversion here, and it makes things a lot easier. Conversion charts, common conversions from different units of measure. We got some helpful information with making wind calls. Holds and leads for moving targets. It's got a angle firing solution page, very quick reference. Has all your angle cosines for solving for angular firing solutions. Mil value adjustments. This is one of the pages that I see as being the most important for shooters that are converting from minute of angle scopes to mil scopes. This basically helps the observer make that second round correction count by being able to identify the size of the target and compare it to what that size of the target is actually in mils. Mil value quick reference sheets. It's got a weapon cleaning procedure. However you as a shooter decide to clean your weapon, it's a good idea to clean that weapon in a complete, consistent fashion, just like everything else that we do as precision shooters. Consistency equals accuracy. The way that we clean our weapons, mainly for a precision weapon system, cleaning the bore, we want to make sure that that is a consistent and thorough process that's very well documented, and you can do it on this page right here so you can refer to it. So basically, the next thing I want to talk about is how to actually fill out a standard data book page. Okay, a lot of shooters really don't understand the benefit of using a data book and how it helps you stay honest with yourself in calling your shots. Okay, a lot of people misunderstand the difference between a call and a plot. The call of the shot is basically no more than where you as a shooter last saw the crosshairs before that rifle fired on the target. Obviously, there's a certain amount of error that the human component can add to the problem in precision shooting. So we obviously cannot always put those crosshairs completely center mass in the target each and every shot. So what we do is we make sure that we call our shots so that we're honest with ourselves and especially honest with our observer, so that the observer is not chasing that shot from the left or the right side of the target and wasting time and not being an efficient team. As you can see on this data book page, it has all your marginal information up on the upper left-hand corner, everything that you really need for your atmospheric conditions, your date, your time, location, barometric pressure, humidity, altitude, temperature. Also has lighting conditions, wind speed, and wind direction. The wind direction is basically in a clock method, very, very simple. You basically just draw an arrow where the wind is coming from and then mark the box as to how fast it was blowing. This is for a zero page. So if you're actually out there zeroing, me mainly now, I use this page more for load development when I do my hand loads so that I can track the group size of those hand loads and record all this data so that I can reference it later. Basically what you're gonna do, there's a spot here for elevation and windage. And if you wanna track that elevation and windage, each and every shot, you're gonna mark down what that elevation and windage was as you adjusted it. The next box over is the call box. And if I made a good shot and I called that shot 100% center mass, I'm gonna make a dot in the center of that target where the crosshairs were before the rifle fired. Now say if I made a bad shot, if I called that shot at 6 o'clock or 9 o'clock, inside or outside the black, basically I'm just gonna use my pencil and I'm gonna make a dot where those crosshairs were. If we're applying the fundamentals of marksmanship properly, those plots are going to reflect where we called the shot. So ideally, if I want to, say, get a 5-shot group going before I make an adjustment on my sights, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fire that 5-shot group and I'm gonna record all those calls and all those plots. If I throw a shot or I make a bad shot and I call it out and there's a flyer inside that group and that shot number that's a flyer is the one that I did call out, then I know that that shot does not matter in that group. So if I have 4 shots touching and one is a flyer, and I called that one flyer, then obviously I know that that's an error that I made as a shooter. There's some other pages in here. There's some rectangular target pages, for here at Magpul Dynamics, where we shoot on rectangular pieces of steel when we're gathering elevation data. And the format of the page is exactly the same throughout this entire book. One of the pages in this book that I find extremely useful that really coincides with using a ballistic computer is what we call the shooter's diary page. What you can do is log all your atmospheric information, log all your marginal information, and then basically you have just a section here where you can write all your notes. What you felt as a shooter, it's basically just a journal of how your day of shooting went in that particular scenario. So yes, in your ballistic computer you can record all that data, but sometimes the interface on a ballistic computer makes it kind of awkward to input a bunch of notes. So here in this data book you can input a bunch of notes so that you can reference it later. Also in this book we have a field sketch page and an unknown distance page. The field sketch page is basically there so that the student can draw a visual representation of what the range looks like with the unknown distance course of fire, so that he can quickly index those targets for his observer, or his observer can quickly index those targets for the shooter. And down below we have a section here for each target number 1 through 10. We have a mil value column, we have a target range column, elevation, and wind for each particular target. In this particular data book page, you draw in the shape of the target that you're going to use, and this is your call and plot box at the same time. Then at the very bottom you have ending data. Okay, on this page this is also extremely valuable information that sometimes does not always have a place to put it in a ballistic computer. This is a round count page. Everybody should be keeping a very accurate track of what rounds they fire out of their rifle. And basically this is here so that as you fire rounds through your barrel and you can track how many rounds are being fired through that barrel and know that, hey, when it's time to have this rifle rebarreled or I start to see a degradation in accuracy, I can reference my total rounds fired so I have an accurate count and I can make a judgment as to whether or not I need to have that weapon system rebarreled at that point in time. My data book is more of a notebook now as I've progressed in my shooting. I have a cover on it. I have pens in here. I've got notebook paper in here. Basically everything that I need at the range to record data I have in my book. I've also included a couple of different pages that I've found very useful to me as a shooter. One of the great little sheets that I have here that's very useful, that I find very useful, if you don't have a ballistic calibrated reticle, obviously you can make your own using a ballistic computer and identifying what hold points that you would like to use. This sheet is very handy. It's laminated so I can use a map pen on it, and I can use this sheet for a second focal plane optic, and then I can have another sheet with the same information on it for full power and half power. So one sheet I'll do full mil holds on a full power second focal plane scope, and then once I find the true half power setting that scope, I'll make another chart specifically for that half power setting. So now I've got two charts that I can go off of in perhaps a combat situation if I need a quick reference for utilizing maximum point blank theory to engage targets. So we understand that the ballistic computer is truly the wave of the future and the state of the art of precision rifle shooting. However, the traditional data book still has its place and will continue to firmly have its place in your pack as a precision rifle shooter. One of the aspects of precision rifle shooting is sight adjustments. Not everybody has the benefit of a calibrated reticle system or a ballistic reticle system in their scopes, so us as precision shooters are forced to manipulate our sights both for elevation and windage. It's very easy to get those adjustments mixed up, whether you're going left or going right, whether you're adding elevation or subtracting elevation. So there's a couple of different things that we would like to talk about to help you adjust those turrets accordingly and precisely. The first of which, all of our scope adjustments, whether we have a open sights or a telescopic sight, we adjust the scopes with what we call angular units of measure. Angular units of measure are usually in the form of minutes of angle, mil radians, tenths of mil radians, or shooter's minutes of angle. And there's some other more odd scopes out there that use 1 inch per 100 yard adjustments. But most commonly in the precision community, we're going to see minutes of angle and mil radian adjustments. Minute of angle is another angular unit of measure. And our adjustments are generally in 1 full minute of angle adjustment, half minute, or 1/4 minute of angle adjustments. 1 minute of angle is equal to 1.047 inches at 100 yards. Because it's an angular unit of measure, increases proportionally with distance. So at 100 yards, it's 1.047 inches, but at 1,000 yards, 1 minute of angle equals 10.47 inches. So as we can see, that distance increases proportionally. The next unit of measure that we could find ourselves using on a telescopic sight, which is starting to become more commonplace now, is a mil radian adjustment. A mil radian adjustment is nothing more than another angular unit of measure, more commonly referred to with the metric system. It was designed to make scope adjustments much more easy and precise with the metric system, because at 100 meters, 1 mil radian equals 10 centimeters. And proportionally, that increases at 1,000 meters, 1 mil radian equals 1 meter. So most of the time, mil radian scopes are broke down into tenths of a mil. So at 100 meters, 1/10 of a mil equates to 1 centimeter. It actually helps the shooter get a more precise adjustment when he's adjusting for zero. Most scopes that we see on the marketplace today have minute of angle scope turret adjustments and mil radian reticle systems inside the scope. So we're having to convert from one unit of measure to another unit of measure. Obviously, this can create some confusion with the shooter and the observer, but there are a couple ways that we can mitigate this by just understanding a couple of key measurements. If we have minute of angle turrets, and that's how we're making our adjustments, and we have a mil-based reticle, we need to think about converting that minute of angle to a mil. And the way that we do that is 1 mil is equal to 3.438 minutes of angle at any distance. That's at 100 yards, that's at 1,000 yards. And obviously that continues to increase proportionally with distance. So the other conversion factor that we need to remember is that 1 mil is equal to 3.6 inches at 100 yards. Obviously, that being an angular unit of measure, that will increase proportionally out to 1,000 yards, whereas 1 mil equals 36 inches. Obviously, this conversion that takes place can confuse shooters and it can confuse observers alike. So what you can do is get a conversion chart which has a complete database of all the conversions at different ranges. What is 2/10 of a mil at 100 yards through 1,000 yards, so that you can understand how far you're moving your reticle at a given target range. So regardless of what unit of measure that we have on our scopes, if we don't have a ballistic reticle inside our scope, we need to adjust those turrets in order to make the round strike the target at the prescribed distance. So one of the things that I identified when I was teaching at the sniper school was that most people very easily confused which direction to turn that turret. Okay, I need to make a left or a right wind adjustment, but which direction should I rotate that turret? Most of your scope turrets are going to have a directional arrow on there, which you can see on this scope right here. Left is pointing up and right is pointing down. Most scopes will always have the same type of adjustments, left being a clockwise rotation, right being a counterclockwise rotation. But again, this gets confusing when you're making multiple wind calls and making zero adjustments. The easiest way to remember this is basically to push left and pull right. And the way that works is the shooter basically grabs the turret adjustment. The observer says, I need you to push to the left 1 mil. So I'm going to push to the left 1 mil. I'm going to push the turret away from me. There's 1 mil adjustment. Now if I need to take that mil to the left off, my observer is going to tell me pull to the right. So I'm going to grab my turret and pull right 1 mil. I'm going to pull the turret towards me. And there is my 1 mil adjustment. This works for elevation the exact same way that it works for windage. Okay, I'm going to pull the scope turret towards me to add elevation, and I'm going to push the scope turret away from me to subtract elevation. It's a real easy way to remember which direction that you're spinning the turret. It's very common for shooters to get confused when they're making multiple wing calls. They adjust that turret the wrong direction and they don't even know it. So by keeping that dialogue consistent from time after time after time, it gets that working in your brain, and that eventually will become unconscious competence, meaning that you'll do it without thinking about it. In most situations, when the shooter is faced with a gusty wind or an inconsistent wind, it can become very complicated to continuously adjust your turrets to compensate for that wind. So primarily what I like to do if I'm running a traditional turret scope, I'm going to dial my turret for elevation, and I'm going to use that mil-dot reticle inside my scope to compensate for wind, because it's just a lot easier to shift from the left to the right in a changing wind than it is to get confused with, hey, wait a minute, how many mils do I have on my turret, or how many minutes do I have on my turret, and whether I'm to the left or whether I'm to the right. It's just very simple to dial for elevation and then just use holds for wind, left to right. In some situations, the shooter can find himself in an area where a rapid multiple target engagement environment exists, and he won't always have time to dial turrets, and this next method is a way to completely eliminate dialing new turrets at all. Basically, one of the techniques that I like to use is once I get into an area and I identify my maximum engagement range and my minimum engagement range, I can pick a midpoint. And when I pick that midpoint, I'm going to actually dial my turret for that midpoint range. So say my close engagement range is 100 yards and my far engagement range is 500 yards. One of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to dial my turret to a 300-yard setting. By doing this, I am altering the 0 point of my trajectory. I'm either moving that 0 farther away or I'm bringing that 0 point closer to me. With a 300-yard 0, with a standard .308 Winchester, 175 grain bullet moving at about 2,600 feet per second, I have a maximum point blank range of 382 yards. That means with a 0 setting at 300 yards, I can hold center mass on a 20-inch tall target and still achieve a hit in a 20-inch vital zone at 392 yards. And I can do that all the way back to the muzzle because the bullet is only going to rise about 9 inches above the line of sight. So it's very, very fast and it's very, very easy to do. Not only combative shooters will use this technique, but it's really good for the hunting world as well, because now the hunter only has to dial one elevation and he has a large engagement range that he could engage a target. Now, using a ballistic computer, it's very easy to find this information out. In a ballistic computer, all you're going to do is manipulate your 0 point and move your 0 point from 100 to 300 yards. When you do that, you're going to look on your range card or whatever it is that that ballistic computer gives you as a result of moving that 0 point. You look on that range card and you say, okay, I've got a 20-inch tall target. Where is my strike of my bullet at 9 inches above and 9 inches below that 300-yard 0? That is that distance, okay? So for a 300-yard setting, again, I can engage a target at 382 yards with a sight setting of 300 yards because the bullet is only dropping 9.2 inches at that distance. This is what also brings us to talk about something called danger space. Danger space is the space at which that bullet is going to occupy the height of that target on its trajectory path. Meaning if I have a 20-inch tall target and that target is at 500 yards away, my bullet is with a 500-yard sight setting, my bullet is going to occupy that 20 inches for a distance of 104 yards. So in layman's terms, with a 500-yard 0 setting, I can hit the top of the target as close as 442 yards, and then I can hit the bottom of the target at a distance of 546 yards, all with the same 0 setting. Now, obviously, this danger space is going to increase or decrease based upon how effective your trajectory is or how efficient that trajectory is. Obviously, with a faster moving bullet, a higher BC bullet, that danger space is going to increase. With the .308 caliber projectile at 175 grains to 2,600 feet per second, the danger space for a 20-inch tall target at 500 yards is, that distance is 104 yards. The danger space at 800 yards for a .308 that shrinks down to 43 yards, because as that bullet is losing velocity, it's also having a sharper, steeper trajectory, and my margin of error shrinks down. And then again, at 1,000 yards, my danger space shrinks to 26 yards for a 20-inch tall target. So if we have a ballistic computer program available to us, we can actually check what our danger space is. So as we shrink that target size down, obviously our margin of error is going to shrink down as well. So with a 10-inch tall target with a zero setting of 300 yards, I have a danger space of 126 yards. Okay, 220 yards, I'll hit the top of the target. 346 yards, I'll hit the bottom of a target. At 500 yards, that danger space shrinks to, for a 10-inch target, it shrinks down to 50 yards. Okay, these are all numbers that you can run in your ballistic computer to actually test the merit of the trajectory of the certain projectile it is that you're shooting. We can very easily turn a traditional mil-dot reticle into a calibrated ballistic reticle by manipulating a ballistic computer and interpreting the information that it's given us. If I want to put a 500-yard zero on my turret and my ballistic computer tells me that my 500-yard zero has an elevation setting of 3.2 mils, I'm going to take my turret, adjust my turret to 3.2 mils of elevation, and then I'm going to do some very, very simple arithmetic to find out where my points of aim need to be for each mil dot, both on the top of the horizontal stadia and below the horizontal stadia. So just running some simple numbers, my first mil dot above the horizontal stadia is 1 mil, and that is a 400-yard zero. So if I have a target that approaches at 400 yards, all I have to do is put that first vertical mil dot on the target, and that is my proper elevation for that particular distance. And again, and so on, as we go up in the scale, the second mil dot is a 300-yard zero. The third mil dot is a 100-yard zero. Below that horizontal stadia, the first mil dot is a 600-yard zero. 2 mils below is 670 yards. 3 mils below, 740 yards. 4 mils below is an 800-yard zero. So we can very easily convert our mil-dot reticle into a ballistic calibrated reticle by understanding how to manipulate our ballistic computers. The other thing that a mil-dot reticle can be extremely useful for is range estimation. Not always are we going to have a laser rangefinder at our disposal to estimate the range to the target. Okay, a laser rangefinder is primarily the best option that the shooter has to establish the perfect range to that target. It's going to be the most consistent and repeatable results. However, if we don't have a laser rangefinder available to us, and we do know the size of the target, we can use our mil-dot reticle to estimate the range using a very simple mathematical formula. Now, range estimation with a mil-dot reticle has some capabilities, and it also has some limitations. There's basically 3 generations of mil-dot reticles. The first generation is basically a 1 mil dot per mil. So there is no subtensions that assist the shooter in determining what is actually a half mil and what is actually a 2/10 of a mil or 1/10 of a mil. The next type of mil-dot reticle that we could have is a generation 2. The generation 2 mil dot has half mil markers to help the shooter extrapolate between what is a half of a mil and what is a full mil. Okay, so if I can extrapolate between a half of a mil, I can identify what is a quarter of a mil, and if I can identify what a quarter of a mil is, I can further break down that reticle with my eyes. The tactical milling reticle is a very nice addition because it eliminates the mil dots completely and gives a more fine measurement of what a true mil is. Also on the tactical milling reticle, there is a section on the far reaches of the reticle where there are subtensions that identify 0.2 mil marks. If I can identify what 0.2 mils is, I can identify what 1/10 of a mil is. Essentially, all we're doing when we estimate the range to the target with a mil-dot reticle is using our reticle as a tape measure. We're measuring the width of the target as it is in mils. It's very important for us when we measure that target in mils to get to the nearest 1/10 of a mil to make sure that the formula is as accurate as possible. Now, the limiting factors in using a mil-dot scope to range estimate targets is, number one, whether you have a front focal plane or a second focal plane scope. A first focal plane scope, you're going to be able to estimate the range to that target at any given power setting. However, with a second focal plane reticle, most scopes have a set power that reticle is calibrated to. Most of the time it's at full power. You need to check your scope's manual and make sure that you're fully aware as to what power those mils are actually calibrated to, that 3.6 inches at 100 yards or 10 centimeters at 100 meters. Secondly, you need to know and understand your reticle. Some mil-dot reticles have spherical mil-dots, which are sometimes referred to as baseballs. Other mil-dot reticles have elliptical mil-dots, which are sometimes referred to as footballs. It's very important that you understand the difference between those two dots because it directly relates to the actual division of measurement in that 1 mil line. Another limitation in using the mil-dot reticle to estimate the range to your target is, obviously we need to know the size of that target in some sort of measurement, and generally speaking that's going to be in inches or yards. However, not everything is the exact same size. If we're out here on this type of range and we're actually shooting at steel plates that are consistent measurements, the mil relation formula works very, very well, and it can be very, very accurate to a certain distance. There are two certain factors that we need to remember when we're estimating ranges to targets. Number one, if we look at this magazine as a steel target, a rectangular steel target, if this steel target is completely square to you and plumb to you, meaning it's 90 degrees perpendicular to your line of sight, and it's plumb, meaning vertically square to your line of sight, we can measure the width of that target and we can measure the height of that target and compare those two using our mil relation formula to get the best distance to that target. However, if I slightly angle this target in a vertical plane, or if I angle that target in a horizontal plane, if this target is 18 inches wide and I angle that target to me as the shooter in a line of sight, that target is no longer 18 inches wide. So that's something that we need to take into consideration when we see our targets. We need to say, okay, is that target, does it appear to be angled to me? If it appears to be angled in the vertical plane, I'm forced to only use a horizontal measurement. If that target is angled in a horizontal plane, I'm forced to only use a vertical measurement because this is the only true length of the target. Some other uses of the mil relation formula for particularly not only hunters but in a tactical environment as well is we can use simple algebra to reverse that mil relation formula. So if I know the range to my target and I know the width of that target in mils, I can actually reverse the mil relation formula and come up with that target size in inches. In an overseas environment, things like road signs and stop signs, car wheels, they're all different from what they are over here in the United States. So one way that you can build a database in your data book is to estimate the range to a particular target of interest, maybe a road sign or a vehicle, a common vehicle in that area of operations, get the range to it as a laser rangefinder, mill out the target with your mil reticle, do the reverse math, and now I come up with an inch measurement for that particular target. Why is this useful? It's useful in the event that I don't have a laser rangefinder and I'm in that same area of operations. I can quickly mill out that target and still get an accurate range to the target. In a hunting application, most people that are going to go on a trophy hunt, they become very selective as to what kind of animal that they want to take. A lot of that becomes field judging. How big is that animal? Is this really the animal that I want to take with this once-in-a-lifetime tag? Well, if you have a mil-dot reticle in your scope and you know the distance to that animal and you want to measure, say, antler length or horn length on a particular animal. It won't be exact, but it'll get you pretty close. You establish the range to that animal with a laser rangefinder. You mill out, say what antler it is that you want to check the distance for or the length for. Reverse the math in the formula, and now you have an inch dimension for that particular animal. It can be very useful in certain situations. So what we're going to do right now is that we're going to do a milling exercise. We're actually going to compare mill measurements between two different optics here. And one of the things that we really want to point out to everybody at home that's watching is the fact that no two people mill a target the same. There's been some technological improvements in reticles over the years that help to give more fine subtensions in the reticles. So the finer the subtension, obviously the finer the mill measurement that I can achieve. If I can identify 0.2 mils, that means I can cut that 0.2 in half and then further identify to 0.1 mil. Other reticles, such as the reticle that you're using here, which is a Generation 1 mill dot with spherical mill dots, it takes a little bit more manipulation of that reticle, and it takes a little bit more knowledge to be able to extrapolate between, okay, what is a tenth of a mil? Because the only reference that you have in here is the dimension of the dot itself and the dimension between center dot to the next center dot.
So really the only subtensions I've got are 0.2 mils for the actual dot and 0.8 in between.
Absolutely. That's what you got to work with this Generation 1 mill dot. But there are some, there's some little tricks that you can utilize with this Generation 1 mill dot to get pretty close to a tenth of a mil. The dimension of my mill dot is 0.2 mils wide in diameter, but if I cut that mill dot in half, I've got 0.1 on each side. So I can, in theory, extrapolate down to a tenth of a mil. But sometimes if you get a target that's a lot farther out there, now you're looking at a target that's maybe a half of a mil or 0.7 mils. Now you're kind of in between those subtensions in your mind that you have to say, okay, let's use this reticle to the most advantage that I can and maybe put that target in between two dots and be able to visualize, okay, I got maybe a tenth or 2/10 in between the dots, and just kind of run it through your mind and say, this is the best guess that I have at this point in time. Some other factors that come into play when we mill targets out is the amount of mirage and how we see that target downrange. Depending on the lighting conditions, if we're shooting at white steel plates, they show up pretty nicely when the sun is shining directly on the plates. But when that sun moves to directly overhead or behind that target, those edges become much more difficult to see.
So the old lights up, sights up.
Yeah, exactly. So we want to make sure that, we're finding the edge as best we can to get that accurate mill reading. And also, mirage. If mirage is out there, you have a 10 power optic on that weapon system right there, you're pretty limited to the amount of magnification that you can try and punch through the mirage to cut down that effect. Whereas like I have a 20 power optic, sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't work. If the mirage is kicking so hard out there and it's really distorting the edges of that target, you're gonna come up with very erratic mill readings between you, me, and maybe even 10 other shooters on the line. Obviously, when we want to mill, we want everything on the scope to be as steady as absolutely possible. And we're not trying to take a shot, so we don't necessarily have to be completely down behind a rifle. The only thing we have to do really is basically get a sight picture through the scope to align our reticle with that target.
I think that's important for people to know at home, attempting to estimate range with the reticle in their scope versus just second shot corrections. If you might not have that spotting scope advantage, that it's often very, very difficult to get into your shooting position and maintain that absolute rigid bench vise
Yeah, absolutely.
image that we're going to need.
When you're trying to mill targets, you don't have to be on the gun. You just have to have a sight picture, and you have to make sure that you check that parallax to make sure that you're not, if your face is not glued to the stock like you would in a normal shooting position, parallax is extremely important that you check that before you start to mill that target. If your face isn't glued to that stock and you don't check your parallax, and I'm moving behind that reticle ever so slightly, that mill reading is gonna change. I could have up to, 0.3, 0.2 difference in mill readings. Basically, we're gonna mill target 4, and I'm gonna get down behind my rifle, and I'm just gonna look through the scope. I'm gonna get a rough sight picture on the target. Me personally, I always like to mill on the right-hand side of the reticle. That's just the way I've always done it. So I line my vertical stadia. If I'm taking a horizontal mill reading, which is left to right, I line my horizontal stadia on the left edge of the target and read to the right. If I'm taking a vertical reading, I basically put my horizontal stadia on the top of the target and mill down. And everybody does it differently. It doesn't really matter how you do it. It's just, that's my system in my head.
These older Gen 1 style reticles, I would start from the heavy 6 o'clock subtension, or I like to mill to the right like you do as well, but go over to 9 o'clock and I work off that big heavy post.
Sure.
And work from there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so let's try and mill out a target. So I get down behind my rifle, identify that I'm gonna mill out target 4, and I'm gonna get a horizontal mill reading, which is left to right. So I use my hands and manipulate my rear support. I'm gonna get a rough sight picture on target number 4. I'm gonna adjust the cant of my rifle and my vertical stadia to match the orientation of the target, because again, we're trying to measure this target like a tape measure would on a piece of wood or a piece of steel.
That makes a lot of sense.
So I want to make sure that I have the most accurate reading as possible. So I cant my rifle to match the angle of the target. Now I'm going to check my parallax because I want to get the most fine mill reading that I could possibly get. So I'm going to check my parallax, up, down, left, right, adjust. I don't have any reticle movement. I have my mill reading, so let's see what you can get with your optic.
I'm on the gun. All right, we're gonna cant the weapon system to match the orientation of the target.
Okay.
Looks good. Parallax coming out. All right, I've got 0 reticle movement.
Okay.
Trying to hold this as steady as possible. Wow, the Mirage is really killing me here.
So what are you coming up with?
Target 4 appears to be 1 mil in width.
1 mil in width, okay. On my reading, I was able to get 1.1 mils, okay, and that difference could be the ability to have those 0.2 subtensions in here, so I can extrapolate between 0.2 and cut that in half and get that 0.1, and also I have the ability to get a little bit more scope magnification out of this optic to be able to minimize the effects of that Mirage.
Yeah, that Mirage was really killing me. That right edge of the target seemed to vary as much as 0.3 mils either side, so I really tried to just split the difference with the 1 mil call.
Absolutely, and you know, like my optic here, I'm able to power up a little bit and minimize the effects of that Mirage, and that power difference coupled with the 0.2 subtensions in the reticle really help out. Now, the next thing I think we should probably do is identify with all the shooters at home, the difficulties of measuring a target that is inside that 1 mil. Okay, now you're going to have to extrapolate between maybe a half a mil and be able to identify what truly is a half a mil, because you have no reference in this generation 1 mil dot reticle. But what you can use is the inside edges of each of that left and right mil dot. Now I know that that is 0.8 mils in between there. Okay, so that if I have a target that fits inside there and is slightly small or inside that gap, all I can really do at that point in time is take my best guess as to, you know, how many tenths am I going to take off that mil reading to get the actual dimension of the target.
Sure.
So I guess we can move out to target number 8, and again we'll get a horizontal mil reading on that target, and we're just basically going to go through the whole process again. We'll check the numbers after we're all done with this and see the drastic differences in range that we'll get from different mil readings. Even a 1/10 of a mil off at a distance of, say, target number 8 is going to be pretty drastic, and we'll show that to all of our viewers at home. So target number 8, transition over to the right, go through my exact same process all over again. Get a clear sight picture. I'm going to adjust the can of my rifle. Now, because I'm going to a farther target out, I'm going to have to readjust my parallax. Okay, I'm going to adjust the power in my reticle. Recheck my parallax. Okay. All right, I'm satisfied with that.
All right, target 8.
Target 8, horizontal mill reading.
All right, target number 8.
Target number 8, horizontal mill reading.
0.7 mils.
7 mils. Okay, see, I was able to get 0.6 with my optic. Okay. So it appears as though we have about 1/10 of a mil difference between what you see and what I see. And that's actually very, very common. When I was going through the Scout Sniper Basic course, between my partner and I, we would see about 1/10 of a mil difference in between our mill readings. And when we came down to comparing those numbers, I would always take about 10% away from my reading, between 7 and 10%, and I'd come up with exactly the same distances as my partner would. And that's just sometimes the way that we see that reticle and the way that we extrapolate those 1/10 of a mil subtensions. And we can also see the benefit of having finer subtensions in that optic for range estimation purposes. So let's look at this here. We'll do some math, run some numbers here, and identify the significant difference in mill readings in that 1/10 of a mil on target number 8. So, what did you get target number 8 at?
So at 0.7 mils, it comes out to 714 yards for the 18-inch wide target.
Okay.
And with your reading of 0.6, 833 yards.
Now,
That's a significant difference.
Now, one of the things that we can do as precision shooters, we can check that danger space at that range and see how far off that measurement's going to put us, and we can see what our range estimation margin of error is for the particular trajectory of our weapon system. That's one of the ways that we can incorporate danger space into this range estimation game.
Well, Kalen, natural point of aim is very important for precision shooting. We've gone through this before. What I'd like to do is kind of get your take on it, maybe a drill that I can run, where if I'm a shooter at home, I can do this safely, of course, but I can kind of find out what my natural point of aim, maybe even dry fire to a certain degree, or get out on a range and before I start going live, do some dry fire, but really find out, am I in that correct position, you know what I mean? So I'd like just to get your kind of take on it.
Absolutely. Natural point of aim is just one of the most important factors in precision shooting. Whether we're at the 100-yard line shooting groups, testing a new hand load that we're building, or we're at the 800-yard line or 1,000-yard line trying to print those super tight groups well within the capabilities of the weapon system. A lot of shooters have a misunderstanding of what natural point of aim really is and how important it is. My take on natural point of aim, it's very, very simple. It's basically where the weapon lays naturally when you are in position behind it. We want our crosshairs to lay on the target or our intended point of aim completely naturally without any input from muscular tension of the shooter. So the rifle is pretty much becoming an extension of our body. When we're in that prone, completely relaxed position and we are testing that natural point of aim, everything has to come full circle. Our natural point of aim and our natural respiratory pause in breathing is all intermixed. So it all has to come together naturally in order for everything to work. There is a great drill that you can do at home or dry fire practice and checking your natural point of aim. Every time I move to a different target on the range, I'm always constantly checking my natural point of aim.
I know for me, I try to do my best just to be a trigger puller. That's it. I find that sometimes I'll close my eyes, open my eyes, I'll see my crosshairs are slightly off, I'll kind of adjust my body a little bit, but I'll also notice sometimes what I fight a little bit for me is that I'll get in behind a gun, I'll get straight, I'll see my crosshairs, I'll kind of move my body a little bit, and then I'll forget in some portion of that I didn't load my bipod or I don't load my bipod the same way. And then all of a sudden you start realizing, like when you load your bipod, you have to take that into consideration as well, because you're in this position, and then really the final result is your body being relaxed, but you have a little tension on, of course, the bipod at that point. And then that's where the crosshairs stop. And sometimes I'll find myself, it's that little bit of fine movement, just that little bit. You might be like an inch or half inch off of where you want to, and you just kind of like work the gun there. You know what I mean? And of course that ends up hurting you in the long run, because it's maybe not 100% of muscle tension, but any percent of muscle tension is obviously going to affect you.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I like to tell my shooters is, how can you repeatedly give me that certain percentage of muscular tension? You know, we've all heard of taking in a breath, letting half out, hold it, and then you start your trigger control. Okay, well, what is 50%? Did I really let out 50%? Were my lungs at 50% capacity, or were they at 30% capacity? Because every time in the prone position, every time we breathe in and breathe out, our chest raises off the ground ever so slightly, which, if we're doing everything right behind the gun and the buttstock is in the proper pocket of our shoulder, those crosshairs are going to move on the target as well. So now we can kind of see where natural point of aim and that natural respiratory pause in your breathing cycle,
They're starting to marry together.
They become one in
So
this.
if you don't break your shot at that same point every single time on your natural respiratory pause, you could find yourself, being an inch or half inch away from where you're actually more of a vertical track.
Absolutely.
You'll probably have them stacked on top. It's just that you'll have a straight line of rounds.
One of the things that we see in group analysis, when we go downrange, we shoot groups and we have the shooters go downrange, we check all the groups, and I walk to each and every group and I say, okay, this could possibly be what you're doing. And I can usually look at a group and I can identify what a shooter's having problems with. Like you said, if I see a vertical string on that group, that means that either that shooter is fighting the rear bag, his rear support, or he's inconsistently placing the butt in the pocket of his shoulder, or he's applying that trigger control when he doesn't have a natural point of aim at his natural respiratory pause. So it all comes full circle. And if you really want to be able to shoot those quarter-minute, half-inch groups,
That's the kind of tedious it's going to take.
absolutely. And that little bit of muscular tension that you put in there, you think those crosshairs, they're just quite at the base of that 1-inch pasty that you're trying to zero on. So you say, I'm just going to muscle that gun in there just a little bit. You're going to have a flyer, and you're going to notice it right off the bat.
Well, for me, first thing I do is usually lay that gun down, make sure it's pointed at the target, and then I try to get in straight behind the gun. As straight as possible, as flat as possible. Usually squeeze that rear bag, lay down on the gun, make sure that's pretty natural to me. I'll double check. I set my gun up so if I close my eyes, open my eyes, I can see it. I don't have to lift my head up or squeeze really hard down.
Absolutely.
Double check, level my gun. From there, I'll start to apply a little bit of forward pressure on the bipod. And then for me, this would pretty much be my position.
Usually one of the things, like you bring up loading the bipod, that's a big point, okay? And if we have that advantage to load the bipod, like if we're in an area where we can get those bipods kind of dug into the ground a little bit, just to help us minimize that crosshair movement on target, that's obviously the advantage that we want to take. So one of the things that I tell my shooters to do so that we're not applying muscular tension to the weapon is basically once you get that rifle in the buttstock in the pocket of your shoulder, I tell them to kind of just scoot forward a little bit with their toes just to put a little bit of forward pressure on the bipod, and then let their body weight take control at that point in time. Let the weight of your body maintain that pressure on the bipod. So now once you push forward with your toes a little bit and you preload that bipod, now I can relax my legs, I can relax my lower back, I can relax my shoulders, and I've still got that consistent positive load on the bipod just by using the body weight alone. So that usually helps out a lot of guys when they're trying to fight. How much do I load? Do I push with my toes? Do I pull the rifle butt into the pocket of my shoulder? Well, no. Basically, one thing that you want to be able to do when that rifle is in the pocket of your shoulder, you basically kind of want to sit up on your hands and lift your chest off the ground and move left and move right. That buttstock should stay right in the pocket of your shoulder, and that's exactly where you have it right now. So now your body position looks real good. The rifle is completely in line with your body. You've got your non-shooting hand on that rear support. That rear support is integral to checking that natural point of aim, because any input that you give that rear support, you have to either hold that rear bag with your hand, you squeeze that rear bag to lift up the buttstock to lower your point of aim, and then you release tension on it to lower the buttstock and increase your point of aim. Once we do that, once we kind of get a rough idea where our crosshairs are on a target, the other thing I like to tell guys to do is just do a mental checklist. Me personally, I start from the bipods and work to the rear, but some guys will start from the rear and work forward. You can basically just say, hey, is everything relaxed? Is my lower back relaxed? Is there any tension between my shoulder blades? Or is there any tension in my arms? A lot of guys will have the tendency to take this non-shooting elbow and pick their shoulder up, and that creates tension in their back. Okay, so what I like to do is just kind of push that forward and lay that naturally in some sort of a chicken wing fashion. The same thing over here on this arm. If this arm is just laying naturally, that's gonna open up that pocket in your shoulder, and it's gonna reduce all that tension in your upper back here. So now that we're in this position, we've got a target down range. What I want you to do is kind of get a rough center of your crosshairs in that target. Check all your body parts, make sure that they're completely relaxed. And then I want you to go ahead and give me 2 breathing cycles and tell me which direction those crosshairs are moving.
More up with a little bit of left.
Up with a little bit of
slight cant to the down and left.
Slight cant to the left. Okay, that's not too bad. So what we want to do is get those crosshairs in the center of that target at our natural respiratory pause, okay? So in order for us to do that, if we need to manipulate that rear bag, what we want to do is manipulate the support of the weapon and not muscle it. Meaning if I have to adjust that buttstock in the pocket of my shoulder, or if I have to squeeze that rear bag a little bit more to get some elevation or take some out, then that's what we got to do. So those crosshairs should lay right center mass of that target when you're at your natural respiratory pause. And once they are, just let me know.
All right, they are.
Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to double check that natural point of aim. We're going to put our shooting hand on the pistol grip, just like we're getting ready to shoot. And I want you to close your eyes, give me 2 breathing cycles, and when you open them up, I want you to tell me where the crosshairs lay.
They're on target.
Okay, now they are on target, so that tells me, as the instructor, that you have a good natural point of aim because your body is completely relaxed, and essentially that weapon system is now becoming an extension of your body. But if you opened your eyes, say, and those crosshairs weren't on target, then we'd have to adjust your body position, okay? We wouldn't want to move the rifle and muscle the rifle, because then we'd be putting muscular tension on the weapon system. So what we would do is we'd either move your hips to the left or to the right, or we would adjust your rear bag to give you some elevation if we needed it, or we'd adjust that bag to take away some elevation.
Gotcha.
Now for the shooters at home, they're saying, okay, which direction should I move my hips? So when I open up my eyes, my crosshairs are to the right of my target. I'm going to move my hips in the opposite direction, okay? So if my crosshairs are on the right side of the target, I need to move them to the left. So what do I need to do to my body?
You need to start shifting it over.
Exactly. I need to start shifting my body over to the right. I'm going to ever so slightly move my hips. I'm going to go through that process all over again.
Okay.
But some people are like, you know, that takes a lot of time, that takes a lot of effort and a lot of energy. In the long run, it's going to pay off, because a lot of people don't think that you can shoot those super tight quarter-minute or half-minute groups from the prone position, and I wholeheartedly disagree with that. If you're applying all the fundamentals of marksmanship properly, you should be able to print the same groups from the prone as you can off of a sandbag bench.
We do this drill obviously with our students, you know, as we're sighting in carbines and stuff. Close your eyes, do your natural respiratory pause. Of course, what we're dealing with primarily is either irons, so you don't see a magnification, so there's not a lot of movement downrange of what your perception is actually happening. Not only that, but if we're running a red dot style optic, I've got a 4 MOA dot that I'm generally zeroing either at 50 or 100. If I'm at 100, of course, it's 4 MOA. So there's a lot of target kind of getting covered up. You know, with this kind of zoom, you know, you're really starting to see that fine detail of watching those crosshairs, and like any little influence of your body is making movement. And we do the close your eyes, open your eyes, do the breathing cycle, but it doesn't show itself as good until you get behind a precision gun or something with some really good glass on it. But you also have another method that really confirms whether you're doing this or not. And that's what I would like you to explain, because I've shot it with you, and if I do everything correctly, what's funny is the level of concentration of trying to do it, because in a sense it's, you know, you look at some things as games, you know what I mean? Like, how do I win this game? And in fact, the game that I'm really winning is influenced by, am I set up behind the gun the way I need to be set up behind the gun? And if I am, then I'll be able to basically not beat the system, but I'll be successful. And I found for me that I'm more likely to utilize maybe 5% of muscle here, a little tweak here, just a little body pitch here, and break that shot off. And like you say, you get a tight one and you get a flyer, and then you're pissed at yourself. But in reality, you're shortcutting the system, and eventually it's going to catch up with you. So I find for me, in regards to the drill that we did, it makes me focus on every single aspect of stabilizing this gun so I can shoot a same hole group with my eyes closed. So I just like you to kind of explain that, so a viewer at home who can go out to the range by themselves, they can do this drill. I mean, you can do this by yourself.
Absolutely. The drill is meant to show the student the absolute importance of that natural point of aim and all the fundamentals of marksmanship. Everything from, you know, body position, proper alignment with the optical axis of the scope, being completely relaxed behind a gun, and then of course that trigger control. That all comes into play. With that drill, everything comes full circle, because as you know, in shooting that drill, if you try to cheat yourself, if you try to put that muscular tension in there and you do open your eyes, those crosshairs are never going to be in the same place twice. They're always going to be in a different place. And that may all be good and fine for a dynamic scenario, or shooting on the move, or shooting under a stressful condition. But when we're trying to shoot groups in zero, or we're trying to keep all of our impacts on an 18-inch wide plate at 1,000 yards, just that little bit of muscular tension is going to push that round on or off that plate.
Or you're a law enforcement officer trying to take a very critical surgical shot in a certain zone on a body. This is obviously what's going to help lend some success to you. I know the drill we did, you had me get behind a gun. We did the same exact thing that I did right here, except the only difference was I took a shot with my eyes closed. Open up my eyes, stabilize my crosshairs again, make sure they're where they need to be, close my eyes, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in again, and on that out breath, at that point, I break that shot again.
Exactly.
I found for me, I was holding tighter groups than when I'm kind of left with that visual.
Absolutely.
You know, because the visual I can kind of correct, but with my eyes closed, it's a lot different. You really have to make sure that the gun's set up properly.
So, Chris, why don't you go ahead and get down behind the gun and check your natural point of aim like we just did before.
Okay.
And we'll just gotta go ahead and walk through everything that the shooters can do at home to test this drill. So once you check that natural point of aim, go through your entire process. This should all be a mental checklist that you have in your brain that eventually should become part of that unconscious competence that we've been talking about. For me, I get down behind a gun, I do the exact same thing each and every single time, just because it's been burned into my memory this way.
All right, I'm there.
Okay, so if we were gonna actually execute this drill, we're just gonna do this dry fire. So go ahead and close your bolt for me. Take your weapon off safe. All right, now we're gonna recheck that natural point of aim. We're gonna breathe in, breathe out. Go ahead and get comfortable. And once you're ready, you let me know.
Ready.
Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna close our eyes. We're gonna breathe in and breathe out And on that exhale, I want you to press the trigger. Okay, now if you were actually taking a live fire shot at this point in time, obviously we would follow through with the complete shot. We'd maintain at constant trigger pressure straight to the rear, and we maintain all the fundamentals of marksmanship until the weapon stops moving. At that point in time, you would open up your eyes and you'd look through your optic and you'd want to look and see where your crosshairs are laying. Basically, that story, what that's going to tell us is how well your body is absorbing the force of that recoil and how much load you have on the bipods. If you see a jump and that your crosshairs are either one target board to the left or one target board to the right, we need to make a body position adjustment to make sure that the mass of your body is helping absorb the recoil from that weapon system. A small amount of movement is acceptable based upon how hard we load the bipods. It's kind of like a check yourself drill. It basically tests your integrity. Hey, can I do this from shot after shot? And can I be honest with myself and say, hey, am I really in that good, comfortable body position? And am I really not putting any muscular tension inputs into the weapon system?
No, it's a really good drill, and I think the fact that anything that can be done on a local range for people and to really test yourselves and get the gun set up. And you know, I think a lot of people just don't take a lot of time to get the gun where it needs to be. Our personalities take over, we muscle it into position, and obviously we get fatigued, something gives, and you know, you get a couple good shots and then some flyers. And you know, the reality is some of these guns would probably hold a lot tighter if we did that, you know what I mean? I mean, your perception of, yeah, I'm shooting, you know, a 1.5 inch group might even come down below 1 inch with that same ammo, the same setup, just the fact that you are consistently doing what you need to do behind a gun and just basically being a trigger puller.
Absolutely, you know, setup, everything comes into play at this precision long range discipline. You really have to be consistent. I mean, consistency equals accuracy in everything that we do behind this precision weapon system.
Awesome.